Welcome to the Afterspin, opinions from thought leaders in our state. I want to ask Becki Gray and Brad Crone. Recently, syndicated columnist George Will wrote a column about a Winston-Salem surgeon who runs a medical diagnostic imaging center. But he can't fully do so without an MRI machine. Our state certificate of needs laws and our bureaucracy are preventing him from being able to do it. He says he can provide an MRI for $500 to $700, whereas North Carolina hospitals charge an average of $2,000. There's been a lot of talk about CON reforms, but our legislature won't pass them. Why, and what's it going to take to ease these barriers? Brad Crone?
Well, Tom, I think the CON is basically a structure, a governing regulatory structure in place from state government to help support the financial base of your hospitals. Yes, a separate and apart facility probably can do it cheaper. The problem you've got is you have hospitals in our communities working 24/7, and they have to have some type of revenue stream because probably anywhere from 25 to 30% of their revenue stream is unfunded. They end up with stranded cost because people go there to access care and never end up paying for it. So I understand the free market argument, but I also understand the argument when it comes to the important role that CON plays in providing a revenue base for our hospital.
Let's define CON, because a lot they have viewers won't understand
Certificate of need.
In other words, what you have to do is you have to go before a state agency and prove that there's a need, and they have to in turn look at all of the other available resources for what you're proposing.
Right.
Well, you have to get a permission slip from government, but in addition to that, your competitor, a hospital or someone else, can step in and say no, that you cannot get that. So this doctor that George Will is, yes. And this process of getting a certificate of need is very cumbersome. It takes a lot of time. There's tons and tons and tons of paperwork that you have to do. It's all very legal. So most people and a lot of doctors don't have the qualifications to do that. So you have to hire someone to do it.
Yeah.
It is very, very expensive. So there's a chilling effect from the very beginning of
it's going to cost $100,000 to go through all the process to be able to do that.
Yeah, and part of it is, a certificate of need where the government would determine whether or not there is a need for a particular facility. If you have a doctor, if you have an investor who is willing to put in the time, the effort, the expense, and then make the investment in an MRI machine or additional hospital beds or to open a long-term facility or to open a dialysis center or any of those kind of things, this is a very involved process. North Carolina is not the only state with certificate of need, but North Carolina is one of the few states that has not repealed certificate of need.
Most of them have done away, because originally there was a purpose for this, and that was when there wasn't as much competition in the medical community as there is right now, particularly with smaller hospitals. They felt a need to protect them.
Well, and that's a real big question. When you have hospitals such as the Halifax County Hospital in Roanoke Rapids, what do you do to protect that institution on having a viable revenue stream so that they can continue to operate? And I think that's a broad-based policy question that we have to look at as a part of the CON.
But with all due respect, where Brad's argument falls short is when you go to other states who have repealed certificate of need and have a much more free market approach to this, you see that costs are lower, you see that there's greater access to care, and you see that the quality of care is improved.
I got that, but do these smaller hospitals
I was just
go
out
away?
In the state of Tennessee in Memphis 2 weeks ago, and Becki, you're right. But you've had 5 rural hospitals in northwestern Tennessee close. And so what happens is a patient ends up driving 90 miles from northwest Tennessee into Memphis to Methodist or to Baptist Hospital there or St. Francis to be able to access care. So as a society, do we want healthy hospitals? And that's a real big question that we have to look at.
The real issue here, though, because we've talked this CON issue, certificate of need issue, quite a bit over the last few years. Why can't we find some compromise so that everybody can live.
The compromise may be in your metropolitan markets where there's larger market share to protect it, that you ease those restrictions.
And it may be for some services or some pieces of equipment. But, you know, Tom, you mentioned in your introduction the General Assembly hasn't acted. Actually, that's not entirely accurate. The Senate has passed at least 2 different times a repeal of certificate of need. Yeah, and I tell you where you really see the need and whether or not we go in. We actually have already started the compromise, recognizing that we need mental health beds. And this really came up when we had the proceeds from the sale of the Dorothea Dix property. There was the $60 million that was allocated. It had to be used for mental health beds. This was when McCrory was the governor. As they were writing the budget, they had all this laid out, and it was pointed out, you can't do this unless you can't use that $60 million to expand mental health beds unless you go through certificate of need. And it's going to be years before you get it, and expense. And so they kind of did a waiver for it. But I think the General Assembly is recognizing it. I think that the hospitals are recognizing this day is coming, and I think we're going to see it.
I think you're absolutely right on. Scope of practice is going to be an important issue too.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I'm sure we'll be talking about this some more. Thank you for watching the After Spin. We'll have more video all during the week on ncspin.com.